Here to talk to you today about what's the future of procurement, but actually also about what the future is for the companies that you work for, because the two things are linked. So what's the future of procurement? If we carry on like we are today, the procurement function as we know it will become extinct in 10 years. And there's a number of reasons for that. Environmental factors which haven't quite reached us, but it's coming. And by the way, this happened in the IT industry 5 years ago. So we know the future is cloud. There are companies that know that, and there are companies that don't know that. And the companies that know that are accelerating far ahead, and those that don't, that probably won't be around in the next 5 years. Or we're heading towards science fiction. So a different way in which we go about procuring products and adding value to our company. And there's not going to be much difference between the two. So you're either going to become extinct or you're going to be heading towards science fiction. And the reason for that is because of technology. So technology is driving a sharp polarization in the way we do things. So what will happen is you either become best in class or you're going to become extinct. And I'll use Google as the example for this. So in the tech industry, Google are number one. Who's number two? The same with the taxi services. Uber, they are worth $68 billion. The second is Lyft, worth $1.5 billion. They're not even close. Even though they own 25% market share over Uber, it still doesn't make any difference. Okay, so again, it's a sharp polarization that's being driven by technology, and the companies that are adopting technology and understand technology are pulling much further ahead than those that don't. And you'll hear me talking about technology as an accelerator as well as we move through the presentation. And I was lucky enough to be one of the first generation that had computers as toys. And I can tell you that nobody from my generation thinks of computers as IT. Okay, so you're not going to hear me talking about IT. But unfortunately, there's lots of people in the companies that you work for that do think of computers as IT, and they think of them as cost-saving. And I can bet you if you go and speak to anyone at Uber, they won't think of computers as IT or cost-saving. They'll think of them as disrupting markets and creating new ones. So just to give you an example of this, in the last 15 years, 52% of the Fortune 500 companies have disappeared. Okay, 52%. So in 1955, the life expectancy of a Fortune 500 company was 75 years. But in 2016, that's now down to 15 years. And that's falling. So there's no guarantees of being big anymore. And even if you are, that's not an advantage. Some of the biggest companies in existence today don't have any assets. So if you think about Facebook, Airbnb, Uber. So why is this happening? So it's happening for a very simple reason, and that reason is Moore's law. So this is the number of transistors that you can buy at the same price doubles every 2 years. And we all intuitively know this, because if you take the iPhone, for example, 2 years ago, my iPhone was a little bit thicker than it is now, so I've got a thinner iPhone, and in 2 years' time, it's probably going to be thinner than this one. So what we're doing is we're taking what's happened over the last 10 years and projecting it into the next 10 years. But the problem with that is that's not how technology works. So technology is an exponential curve. So what happened in 10 years, we have something very, very different to a thin iPhone. So just to illustrate this, I've got a story about the Emperor of China. So the Emperor of China had a subject that came to him, and he invented a new game. It was the game of chess. And the Emperor was really impressed, and he said, wow, this is amazing. How can I reward you for this? And the subject said to him, well, I'm just a humble guy. Please just give me a bit of rice for my village. I'll tell you what, please just place 1 grain of rice in the first square, 2 grains of rice in the second, 3 grains of rice, 4 grains of rice in the third, and so on. Just keep doubling it each time, and I'll be fine with that. So the emperor thought, well, this guy's an idiot, you know. He doesn't want anything. He says, yeah, okay, that's fine, I'll go ahead, I'll do that. What he didn't realize is he just agreed to supply the man with 5 times the amount of rice in the world. And the reason for that is the human brain can't comprehend the second half of the chessboard. We're very, very bad at understanding exponential equations. So if we take the last 10 years and think of that as the first half of the chessboard, the second 10 years is like the second half of the chessboard. And our CEO, Christian Lang, he sits on an advisory panel for the World Economic Forum. And they were tasked to survey all of their CEO members. And they asked them to place a host of events on a timeline to see where they thought they would fit in. So we've got things on there like driverless cars, AI, so when will artificial intelligence do a job as well as a white-collar worker, or when will 25% of global spare parts be printed on 3D printers? And the interesting thing about this is that none of the projections went beyond 2027. And even more interesting, we're tracking 3 years ahead of this. So we're already 3 years ahead of where we should be. And if all of these things happen, the world's going to change as we know it. So this is a quote by William Gibson, who's a famous science fiction writer. And he's saying, the future is already here. It's just not very, very evenly distributed. And he's absolutely right. The future is here, but we're not feeling it right now in this room. But if you go outside and speak to a black cab driver, he's going to tell you that the future's here. Another example is in Rio last year. Airbnb hosted more hotel rooms than the rest of the hotels in Rio put together. So if you go and speak to the hotel industry, they'll tell you that the future's here. But it's not just disrupting markets. It's also creating new ones. So in Norway, the price of fuel cars, petrol cars, they're falling like a rock. And the reason for that is because they've hit 15% electrical car adoption. So they don't have to hit 50% in order to reach that pivotal point. 15 is enough. And I've got a really, really simple example here. So, and by the way, shaving and men's grooming is a $13 billion industry, apparently. I didn't know that. And it was controlled by one brand. So I'm not going to tell you who it is, but I'm sure you can guess. We work with these guys. So what happened is there was these 3 surfers from LA. And they got together and they asked the question, well, why are razor blades so expensive? And nobody can give them a good answer. So what they did is they created a company whereby you can get your razor blade shipped to you every month for £7. And then they came up with this advertising campaign, which is our blades are fucking great. I mean, that's very, very impactful and very, very disruptive. They created this in one day with £4,000. And what they also then did is it only took them 2 weeks to source all the supplies that they needed in order to create that product. So if you fast forward 3 years later, the Dollar Shave Club have a 53% market share in the online shaving market. So our CEO, as I said, we work with them. Our CEO was sat in a room of 40 of execs of the other brand. I'm sure you can guess who they are. And he said, how can you let this happen? And their reply was, well, they only had a small share of the market. We didn't see them as a threat. But then they grew. Well, of course they grew. That's exponential growth. And then they said, okay, so it took us 24 months to put in place the processes, the approvals, the contracts and the suppliers we needed to come up with a competitive product. I mean, 24 months. In a startup world, where I come from, if you take 24 months to react to a threat, you're absolutely finished. So here's another example, and you probably already heard about this one. This is the Blockbuster story, right? So Blockbuster were offered to buy Netflix in 2006 for $50 million, and they passed because they believed their physical network of distributed stores and supply chain could beat Netflix hands down any day. But today, Blockbuster are bankrupt, and Netflix are one of the most valuable companies on NASDAQ. So the message is, without agility, you will lose. And I bet if Blockbuster could source their goods 5% cheaper, that wouldn't have saved them. It wouldn't have saved them at all because they were in the wrong industry. So if your CEO walks in through the door tomorrow and says, we need to be in a new industry, are you going to say, right, I'm going to follow you, or are you going to come up with the similar types of arguments that Blockbuster did? And by the way, this is happening in the electrical car industry as well. So they're going through this right now, and in 10 years' time, that industry is going to be completely different. So if you know the industry, you'll know that they're going to have to go through and resource 99% of their products because they're moving towards electrical cars. So their procurement teams, they're going to stop trying to source goods 5% cheaper, and they're actually going to have to reevaluate their entire supply chain. But it's not just about the disruptor beating the incumbent. It's not just about the small guys beating up the bad guys. Or the big guys, sorry, they're not bad. So GM have released a car which competes with the Tesla Model 3. It beats them on price and availability. So you can win. Anyone can win if you have the right mindset, but you have to have a startup mindset. So the way you go to market, the way you design your products, the way you source things. So why is this happening? Well, it's happening because companies are prioritizing process over innovation. So your CEO is probably a really good example of this. Your CEO is likely to be a maverick buyer. And I'm the same. I'm a rogue spender. I have been all my life. So if I'm in a room with a customer and I need to buy lunch, I just go ahead and do it. If I need to book an event, I just go ahead and do it. You know, I'm that guy. But I'm probably one of the most efficient and valuable people in the organizations that I've worked with. And at Tradeshift, when we hear the term rogue spend or maverick buying, what we hear is people that care enough to break the rules to get shit done. And you're never going to get rid of maverick spend. It's been the same for 20 years. So why is that going to change now? And even if it was lower, that's not an advantage. What is an advantage is to empower your people to do the things they need to get stuff done. And inflexible systems over smart people. So again, at Tradeshift, if we have a smart person that wants to do something and our systems get in the way, we find a way for them to do it because that makes absolute sense. However, in the big corporate world, the investment in systems is so huge that it's very, very difficult to navigate around those systems. So you have smart people who can't get stuff done. And it's also happening because companies are prioritizing cost savings over value creation. So I really can't say this enough. If you optimize for cost savings, your output is going to be cost savings, not the value that you set out to create. And we hear suppliers asking, well, you know, my big customers, they never ask me what additional value I can bring to the table, but what they always ask me is how I can reduce my price. And you know, that's not a good thing because 90% of the corporates out there today, they don't manufacture anything. So all the innovation is taking place within the supply chain. And if you drive a wedge between yourself and that innovation, that's going to hurt your top line. And that's why we have, you know, some of the most successful and smartest companies in the world, like IKEA, Apple, and Tesla. They have a fully integrated supply chain. And you know, we've been through this big outsourcing revolution, and that has also hurt us from an innovation point of view. But it's not necessarily bad to have a big outsourced supply chain, but just think about the system that you put in between yourselves and them. So a focus on cost savings only will not enable new product and service innovation. It will not accelerate your speed to market. It will slow it down, actually. Protect your business from disruptive forces, and it will not reduce your exposure to risk. So on that last point only, it'll cost you more money than it will from squeezing out any savings you're going to make with your suppliers. And when I hear the term spend analytics, I get very skeptical because it's not supply chain analytics. You know, and the reason we're really, really bad at this is we have very, very few total views. I mean, how many times have you heard of, you know, procurement squeezing out a few basis points from a supplier only for it to be added on as a service charge? So it's important to get a full holistic view, especially as we go into the future. But we do have a choice. We can either veer towards extinction or we can define the future. So the reason that the dinosaurs died out is because they had a change in environment and they couldn't adapt. So if you think about the last 10 years and the next 10 years and that meteor hitting the Earth and the shockwaves rippling out, those shockwaves, they're there. They might not have hit you yet, but they will come. So what does this mean for procurement? Well, first of all, indirect, direct, and services will all mix. And we're seeing this with our customers now. So some of them have indirect stuff that looks like direct, direct stuff that looks like indirect, and they're probably all moving towards some kind of service agreement anyway. There'll be no more one size fits all. So how many times have we heard the term industry best practice? Best practice means average. So take exactly the same as everyone else is doing and implement that across your company. I mean, do you really think that's a smart thing to do? Especially when you're going to be competing against people that are not from your industry, that are more nimble, more agile than you, and have more at stake. So you'll just be just as vulnerable from disruption as everybody else by implementing best practice. And commerce will be highly collaborative. So at the moment, you've got your supplier portal, the suppliers keying information, pressing send, and off that goes into a black box, which is your company. And probably 99% of cases, there's no collaboration there, because at the moment, you're looking to avoid collaboration, because collaboration is friction, and that's not something that you want. But more importantly, procurement is just a starting point. So how can procurement get a stake at the table? How can they get a chair at the board? Well, first of all, stop being so obsessed about procurement. Think about digitalization of the supply chain. So, if you go and talk to your CEO about that, go and talk to him or her about innovation and agility and revolutionizing the relationships you have with your supply chain. I promise you, he or she will listen 1,000 times more than if you go and talk to them about rogue spend, because they are probably a rogue spender and they probably don't care. So procurement, treasury, accounts payable, resource planning, direct materials, CSR, risk management, product information, time management, analytics, temp labor, travel, supplier information, and collaboration. They all have one thing in common. It's the same suppliers. It's the same end users. It's the same data. Yet, we keep buying the same single-purpose tools, solving only one process over and over. So for those of you that don't know what this is an egg and muffin toaster. This is your procurement system. Or sorry, your 3 procurement systems, one for direct, one for indirect, one for services. They're all egg and muffin toasters. So what we want to do at Tradeshift is build software for the future of procurement and not the past. So when we went ahead and thought about this, we thought about what do we need to do? Well, first of all, we've got to be flexible. So a platform and not a single tool. So if I think about my phone again, my phone is a platform. Whether I want to use it for time management or social media, all I have to do is activate a process via an app, and I can do whatever I want. It's the same with Tradeshift. Tradeshift has an app store. All your suppliers already use Tradeshift, and you can leverage any business process you want within that environment. It's got to be collaborative. So collaboration-centric procurement. Give people your process in a collaboration view rather than trying to collaborate in the process view. It's much more natural. It makes sense for them. It's got to be end-to-end. So we're not just focusing on one process. We're focusing on all the processes within the source-to-pay chain. Again, we've got 50-plus best-of-breed third-party app providers on the Tradeshift network. We can just go ahead, select one, and enable whichever process you want to enable at any point in time. Real-time data analytics, not spend analytics. So a 360-degree view of your supplier, so you can take a look at what contracts you have with them versus how many exceptions they're creating in AP versus how many discounts in treasury. And innovation. So we're continuously working with all of our customers to push the boundaries as what is possible. So we're doing trials with AI. We've got organizations, big corporates doing mobile-only procurement because they believe the desktop is dead and it's not really being used anymore. Heroes instead of rogues. So we're working with all the major banks to provide one-time use virtual credit cards, which means that you can give your Maverick buyer the ability to go out and buy what they need to do on the fly with the credit limit that they need for that one-time purchase. And that's all done and captured through the procurement system. So procurement then become the heroes and not the bottleneck. Real-time master data. So Tradeshift is like a social network. It's like LinkedIn. So our 800,000 suppliers, they've all got a profile just like this one. It contains information about them, such as certifications, payment information, product data. And what they found is that all of their customers have the same information. So what our suppliers are doing is they're maintaining their information in Tradeshift and pushing it out to that customer base, which makes absolute sense. After all, they're the ones that know where they live, and they know what their bank details are. Product information, not catalogs. So one of the things I've noticed about procurement is everybody's obsessed with catalogs. Yet everybody's talking about this Amazon-like user experience. It's like the key word in the industry. But never have I gone onto Amazon and gone, right, okay, I'm going to go to the Staples catalog and find a product, and then I'm going to go to the Office Depot catalog and find another product and compare the two. It's not how it works. You just search, and you have the results in front of you. So that's what we've done at Tradeshift. And what we do is get the suppliers to upload their product data and decide who gets to see it and what prices people are going to apply to different organizations. So rather than having 100 catalogs, you've just got a single dynamic product stream to replace all of that. And here's a view of our app store that I've been talking about. So again, you've got all your suppliers in one place on Tradeshift. Instead of having to go out and buy another system and onboard to that system and train users, you just go to the app store and pick what you want. So if you're using Tradeshift for e-procurement, e-invoicing, for master data management, and you want to do sourcing, you just go onto the app store, select the sourcing app, and start using it. Okay, very, very different to what else is happening out there in the world. And there are other things that we have on there. So we've got things like RFP management, contract lifecycle management, supply chain finance, quote collaboration as examples. Looking at the time, I've got 5 minutes left. So that is our take on the future of procurement. I'd like to open up the floor for any questions. So please go ahead. So in your particular case, in terms of the smart cities, the buyer is the council, the local authority, and the supplier is the supplier of products and services to that council or local authority. So the citizen wouldn't necessarily have a stake in this, but it would directly affect, potentially how good the products and service they're going to receive is, because what the council will be able to do is, rather than just say, well, I've got these suppliers here and I better use them, and I'm going to beat them up over price, they've got a whole network of suppliers that they could use. And they could run a dynamic search to say, okay, well, I need a specialist engineer with this ISO certification, with these particular skills, and search across the network of suppliers on Tradeshift, and they've got a whole list that they can find, even if they're not contracted. And they can go ahead and collaborate with them, create that contract. Okay, they can send them the order, if you like, the PO or whatever you're asking them to do, and then they can flip that back. That PO back as an invoice, and that goes back into the ERP system or the accounting system that the council are using. So that's how it would work in your particular scenario. Thank you very much. Again, we're on the 5th floor as you walk in on the right-hand side, so if you want to pop over and ask anything, please do so. Thank you.